The doors did not creak. They slammed. Two Peel regional security contractors in navy blazers, pulling the heavy oak shut with the flat, final sound of a decision already made. On the other side of that sound stood a 59-year-old woman named Mabinti Kamara, wrapped in a blue and gold jewel she had tied herself at 5 that morning, holding a covered pot of akara wrapped in a checkered kitchen cloth, still warm against her forearms. She had fried the last batch at 4:40 a.m. in her small kitchen in Scarborough, the oil popping so loud it woke the neighbor's dog. Because she wanted her daughter's wedding, even one held in a stone church in Rosedale with a $60,000 flower budget, to have at least one thing in it that tasted like home. She stood on the church steps in the January cold, her breath fogging in front of her, and she did not bang on the door. She did not shout. She lowered herself onto the top step, set the pot in her lap, and pulled her coat tighter. And she waited, because Mabinti Kamara had been waiting her whole life for one thing or another, and a closed door was nothing new to a woman who had crossed an ocean with 2 suitcases and buried a husband in a country that was not yet fully hers. Before we go further, if you are the kind of person who believes a mother's sacrifice deserves to be seen, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happened next inside that church in Toronto is the kind of story that gets shared at kitchen tables from Scarborough to Halifax. Now let me take you back to where it started. Isatu Kamara was 34 years old, and on the morning of her wedding she was standing in front of a mirror in the bridal suite of a stone chapel just off Mount Pleasant Road, wearing a dress that cost more than her mother's rent for a year. And she was, for the last calm hour of her life that day, happy. Isatu was a family doctor. Not the kind who works 3 days a week out of a walk-in clinic in a strip mall. The kind who had built her own practice from nothing in Scarborough, a clinic with sliding scale fees and a waiting room that always smelled faintly of the ginger tea her receptionist kept brewing. She bulk billed the OHIP patients who couldn't afford the gap, and she never once complained about it, because she remembered what it was like to grow up in a household where every dollar had somewhere specific to go. Her name had been on a plaque at a hospital fundraiser gala. She had been profiled once in a Toronto Life piece about young GPs reshaping community health. She had built a life, and every floor of it rested on one woman with a frying pan. Mabinti Kamara had come to Canada from Freetown, Sierra Leone, in 2001, with her husband Alusine and their 6-year-old daughter and 2 suitcases. One held clothes. The other held a heavy cast-iron skillet, a mortar and pestle worn smooth on one side, and a tin of dried pepper her own mother had pressed into her hands at the airport in Lungi. "Why are you bringing a cooking pot to Canada?" Alusine had asked her, half lawing, hauling the second suitcase onto the scale at check-in. "Because Canada has snow and highways," Mabinti told him, not laughing at all. "But it does not have my akara, and our daughter will need to eat something that tastes like where she came from." Alusine had been a shoemaker back home, and in Toronto he found work at first doing repairs out of a rented stall in a strip mall on Lawrence Avenue, resoling boots for bus drivers and construction workers who couldn't afford new ones. He was a gentle, precise man, the kind who could explain the mechanics of a zipper to a 6-year-old like it was a small miracle, and he had a saying he repeated to Isatu on the walk to school every morning, rain or snow. "Isatu, the hand that fries your akara at dawn is holier than any hand raised in prayer on Sunday. Remember that. Prayers are said with the mouth. Love is proven with the hands." Mabinti couldn't find steady work at first. Her English was passable but accented. Her credentials from home meant nothing here. So she did what she knew. She fried akara. Small, round, golden bean cakes, crisp outside, soft within, seasoned the way her own mother had taught her in a compound in Freetown. She sold them from a card table outside their apartment building near Kennedy and Eglinton. Word spread through the Sierra Leonean community, then the wider West African community, then, slowly, to everyone in the neighborhood who liked good food and didn't mind a lineup. A food blogger from downtown eventually found her stall in the Scarborough Town Center parking lot on Saturday mornings and wrote, "The best breakfast in the GTA isn't in a restaurant. It's out of the back of a minivan in a strip mall parking lot." Within 2 years, Mabinti had a proper stand with a permit and a line that started forming before sunrise. She woke at 4 a.m. every day, soaked her black-eyed peas, ground them by hand long after she could have afforded a machine because she said the machine made the batter lazy, fried in batches of 40, and sold every last one. Every dollar that didn't go to rent went into an envelope taped inside her closet labeled, in her careful looping handwriting, "Ayasata School." "This money is not for spending," she told Alusine. "This money is for Asatu's mind. Her mind is expensive. Let it be." Alusine died when Asatu was 17. A heart attack, sudden, while he was hunched over a boot at his workbench on a Thursday afternoon. He set down his awl, pressed a hand to his chest, and was gone before the ambulance made it through rush-hour traffic on the 401. Isatu found his old measuring tape in a drawer weeks later, the yellow fabric worn soft from decades of use, and she kept it. It sits to this day in a small glass case on her desk at the clinic next to her framed medical degree. After Alusine died, Mabinti did not slow down. She could not. Isatu had 1 year of high school left, then university, then medical school, a decade, at least, of dreams that cost money neither of them had. Mabinti's 4 a.m. became 3 a.m. 6 days a week became 7. She added jollof rice and pepper soup to her stand, hired no one, did every single thing with her own 2 hands. Those hands changed over the years. Palm oil stained her fingertips a permanent amber. The hot skillet left thin white scars across her knuckles. Her joints swelled from decades of kneading and grinding. Mabinti's hands became, in Asatu's eyes, the most beautiful and the most broken thing she had ever seen on a human being. "Mama, let me get a part-time job. Let me help. Your job is school. My job is the stove. Do not confuse the two. But your hands. Mama, my hands are my business. Your books are your business. When you are a doctor, you will build me a kitchen with a proper vent hood. Until then, study." Isatu studied. She graduated top of her class, got into medical school at U of T with a partial scholarship that still left a mountain of debt, and by the time she was 32, she had opened her own clinic and paid off every cent. By 34, she was, by any measure, successful, respected, published a few times in community health journals, on a first-name basis with half of Scarborough, and her mother still woke at 3 a.m. to fry akara. "Mama, you don't have to do this anymore. I can take care of you now." You think I fry akara for money, Isatu?" Mabinti had looked at her the way she looked at her when Isatu said something foolish. "I fry akara because it is who I am. The day I stop is the day I stop being Mabinti, and I am not finished being Mabinti yet." She still sold out every Saturday. She still wrapped a small bundle in cloth every Sunday and brought it to Isatu's condo downtown, because a daughter who eats takeout instead of her mother's cooking is a daughter who has started to forget where she came from. Isatu never forgot. She kept her mother's photo on her desk beside her father's measuring tape, and she never once, not once, let a Sunday pass without eating from that cloth bundle. And then she met Trent Ashford, and something in the architecture of her life quietly, invisibly, began to buckle. Trent was 36, handsome in the specific expensive way of men who have never once worried about a hydro bill. And he had built a modest fortune of his own in commercial real estate. Though the foundation of it, everyone in Toronto's old money circles knew, was his family's name. His father, Graham Ashford, sat on the boards of two banks. His mother, Vivian Ashford, chaired a gala committee at the Royal Ontario Museum and had never, in her entire adult life, cooked a meal she hadn't first had catered. Isatu met Trent at a hospital fundraiser gala at the Fairmont Royal York, where she'd been invited to speak briefly about her clinic's community outreach work. Trent found her afterward by the bar, told her the work she was doing sounded like the only interesting thing anyone had said all evening, and asked her to dinner. He was charming, attentive, quick with a joke about zoning bylaws, and for the first several months he was, by every appearance, wonderful. Then he met Mabinti. Isatu brought him to her mother's apartment for Sunday dinner. Mabinti had cooked for 2 full days, jollof rice, pepper soup, fried plantain, a fresh batch of akara still warm from the pan. The apartment smelled like celebration. Mabinti met Trent at the door and took his hands in both of hers. The way she greeted everyone, those amber-stained, calloused hands wrapping around his soft, manicured ones. "My daughter talks about you every week. Come, sit. You are too thin, you people who eat only salad." Trent smiled, said all the right things, sat, ate a polite forkful of jollof, and something in his face shifted just for a second when Mabinti had first taken his hands. A flicker, quick, controlled, almost invisible. But Isatu's best friend Fode Toure saw it. Fode had known Isatu since their undergrad years at U of T, an accountant now, sharp-eyed and blunt in the particular way that made dinner parties tense. He had a gift for noticing what people tried to hide. He flinched, Fode told her later, in the parking lot. "What?" "When your mother took his hands, he flinched, Isatu, like he'd touched something he needed to wipe off. You're imagining things. I'm an accountant. I don't imagine numbers. I read them. And what I read on his face was a man who looked at your mother's hands like they were a liability." Isatu dismissed it. She was in love, and love has a way of editing what you're willing to see. But Fode had been right, and over the following year, the evidence accumulated the way test results accumulate on a chart nobody wants to look at too closely. Trent never came back to Mabinti's apartment after that first dinner. There was always a reason, a closing, a headache, a work trip. When Mabinti brought her Sunday cloth bundle to Isatu's condo, Trent, if he happened to be there, developed a sudden, rotating series of food sensitivities: palm oil, then legumes generally, then heavy food as a category. Once, Fode came by Isatu's place to return a book and found a familiar checkered cloth in the kitchen garbage can, the akara inside still warm. He didn't say anything to Isatu that night. He was collecting evidence the way an accountant collects receipts. One anomaly means nothing. A pattern means something. 3 data points mean a conclusion. The third came 6 months before the wedding. Mabinti had a health scare. A stroke, minor but frightening, that put her in Scarborough Health Network for 8 days. Isatu was there every single evening after her shifts, sleeping some nights in the vinyl recliner, bringing her mother's own pillow from home because hospital pillows, Mabinti said, smell like other people's fear. Trent came once. He stood in the doorway for exactly 22 minutes, didn't sit, didn't touch the bed rail, said the room made him uncomfortable, and told Isatu he'd wait for her in the car. He waited 40 minutes, then left without her. But someone else showed up in that room, day after day, who wasn't required to be there at all. Ibrahim Sese was 29, a paramedic turned hospital care coordinator, born in Freetown himself, raised in Toronto from the age of 8. His parents ran a small West African grocery in the Golden Mile Plaza. He'd gone into healthcare, he liked to say, because his grandmother had died in a clinic back home, with 3 nurses covering 200 patients, and he'd promised himself at 14 that no one's grandmother would ever go through something like that alone if he could help it. He was assigned to coordinate Mabinti's discharge planning. He walked in on his first day, noticed the amber stains on the old woman's hands, noticed there were no flowers in the room except from the one visitor who came every evening, and said, "Good morning, Auntie. I'm Ibrahim. I'll be helping look after you." Mabinti studied him. "Ibrahim," Cisse. "You are Sierra Leonean Freetown on my father's side. Do you fry akara?" He laughed. "My mother would put me out of the house if I said no. Good. Then we understand each other already." Over the next 8 days, Ibrahim did the things paramedics turned coordinators do. Checked vitals, coordinated her medications, arranged her follow-up care. But he also stayed after his shift ended some nights, just to sit and listen to her stories about Freetown, about the compound she grew up in, about the ocean she said she still dreamed about. He brought her real pepper soup from his mother's kitchen because, as he put it, hospital food is a punishment, not a meal. On the 5th night, he found her awake at 2 a.m., silent tears sliding down into her pillow. "Auntie, is it the pain?" "The pain I know how to carry. My son, I've carried worse for longer." "Then what is it?" She was quiet a long moment. "My daughter is marrying a man whose mother looks at my hands like they carry disease. A man who came to see me for 22 minutes and left because the room made him uncomfortable. I have spent 30 years frying akara so my daughter could have a life. And her life is about to belong to people who are ashamed of the hands that built it." Ibrahim sat on the edge of the bed and took those hands in his, amber-stained, scarred, trembling slightly, and held them the way you hold something you understand the weight of. "Auntie, these hands aren't something to be ashamed of." These hands raised a doctor. "Anyone who can't see the value in that doesn't deserve a seat at your table." Mabinti looked at this young man sitting with her at 2 in the morning, a man who wasn't even required to be there, and she said something she had never once said about Trent. "My daughter doesn't see it yet." But she will. A daughter's eyes are slow sometimes. A mother's instincts are almost never wrong. Ibrahim brought Mabinti akara every day after that, even after discharge. He started stopping by her apartment on Thursday evenings, just to check in, and then just because he wanted to, sitting on her kitchen floor eating with his hands, learning her recipes, listening to her stories. "You are the daughter I lost the chance to have," she told him one evening. "And you're the grandmother I never got to keep," he said back. Neither of them knew it yet, but that little kitchen was going to become the most important room in this whole story. The wedding was set for a Saturday in mid-January, at a stone chapel near Mount Pleasant, 400 guests. Reception after at a private estate outside Oakville. The whole thing budgeted north of $300, sewn and paid for almost entirely by Vivian and Graham Ashford. And that, as it turned out, was the entire problem, because whoever writes the check controls the guest list, the flowers, the menu, and, apparently, the seating chart. Mabinti's name appeared on the final list in row 19, not with family, not close to the front. Row 19, behind Trent's law school classmates and his mother's museum committee. "My mother is in row 19, Isatu said, staring at the chart. "Darling, the front rows are reserved for immediate family and the wedding party's closest circle," Vivienne said smoothly. "Over lunch at a restaurant Isatu couldn't have afforded on her own 5 years earlier. Your mother will be perfectly comfortable in row 19. She is my immediate family. She is my mother, of course, but there are certain expectations we're managing, given who's attending. Move her. Move her to the front, or I will." Vivienne moved her to row 4, a compromise that wasn't one. Then came the menu, a French-Canadian caterer flown in from Montreal, seared duck breast, a raw bar, a $175 a plate tasting menu, not a single West African dish on it anywhere. Mabinti had offered gently to bring a kara for the reception, enough for all 400 guests, at her own expense, as her gift to the wedding. That's sweet, Mrs. Kamara, Vivian said, in a meeting where the words came out coated in sugar with no warmth underneath, but the menu's been finalized. We want the presentation to feel cohesive. I could just bring some as a small side. A few baskets for the guests who'd enjoy it. Vivienne glanced at Trent. Trent glanced at his plate. A whole silent conversation passed between mother and son in under 2 seconds, and Trent said nothing at all. I don't think that will be necessary, Vivienne said. Mabinti nodded. She did not argue. She never argued. She went home and fried akara anyway, because that was simply who Mabinti was. She fried whether the world wanted it or not, and she wrapped it in her good checkered cloth, and she planned to bring it, because a wedding without something that tasted like home was, to her, not really a wedding at all. It was just an expensive party. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Fode overheard something. He'd stepped out onto a balcony at an engagement dinner at the Ashfords' house in Rosedale to take a call, and below him, on the terrace, Vivian and Trent were talking, unaware anyone could hear. Bring akara in a checkered cloth like we're at a night market, Trent. Absolutely not. I've spent close to $250,000 on this wedding. What if Isatu insists on it? Isatu won't know. I've already spoken to the venue's security team. No outside food gets past the doors. If that woman shows up with a pot, they'll stop her. And the ceremony itself. She's in row 4. That's already too close for my comfort. I'm handling it. What does handling it mean, Mum? It means by the time that ceremony starts, she won't be inside the building. Fode's blood went cold, his phone still warm in his hand. He called Isatu that night. We need to talk in person, not over the phone. They met at a Tim Hortons on Lawrence, of all places, at 10 at night, and Fode told her everything. The food in the garbage, the flinch at dinner, the 22 minutes at the hospital, and now the plan to lock her mother out of her own daughter's wedding. Isatu sat very still. The kind of still that comes right before something breaks. Are you certain? I'm an accountant, Isatu. I don't report a number I haven't verified twice. She looked at her hands. Clean, careful, a physician's hands, hands trained to save lives, hands her mother had paid for with her own. Then she thought of her mother's hands, amber-stained, cracked, and every single thing those hands had built. Fode, yes. On Saturday, I need you at the back of that church. Near the doors. Watching for my mother. And if anything happens to her, anything, you text me immediately. Not after the vows, the second it happens, and what will you do? Isatu looked at her oldest friend. I'll do exactly what my mother would do for me. Saturday, 3:40 p.m. The chapel was full. 400 guests, white orchids on every pew, a string quartet playing something soft and expensive, January light thin and gray, through the stained glass. Isatu stood in the bridal suite on the second floor, in a gown that had taken 3 fittings, her father's old measuring tape tucked, for luck, inside the small clutch she carried, though she told herself later it was never really about luck at all. It was a reminder of exactly whose shoulders she was standing on. Mabinti arrived at 3:15, wearing the same blue and gold jeel and lapa she had worn at her own wedding 36 years earlier in Freetown, carrying the pot of akara wrapped in her good checkered cloth. She climbed the stone steps slowly, her knees protesting every one of them, and at the top 2 men in navy blazers stepped into her path. Ma'am, can I see your invitation? I don't have one. I am the bride's mother. They exchanged a look. One pressed his earpiece, murmured something, listened, looked back at her. Ma'am, I've been informed outside food isn't permitted at this venue. This is akara. For my daughter's wedding. I'm sorry, ma'am. No outside food. I am her mother, ma'am. Please step back. The ceremony is about to start. Vivienne appeared in the doorway behind them, in champagne silk, pearls, the particular smile of a woman entirely used to getting what she paid for. Mrs. Kamara, I really think it's best if you wait out here. It's a big day and we want it to go smoothly. I want to see my daughter. She's upstairs, focused, calm. Let's not disturb that. I am not a disturbance. I am her mother. Vivienne's gaze flicked deliberately to the pot, the cloth, the gilet. It's simply not the right moment. And then the doors closed, not slowly, not gently. Mabinti sat down on the top step, the pot in her lap, her hands folded over the cloth, and she waited, the way she had always waited. Without complaint, without anger, with only patience and the quiet certainty that her daughter would find her. She always had. Inside, near the back pew, Fode pulled out his phone. Isatu felt hers vibrate through the fabric of her clutch as she stood at the top of the aisle, veil down, guests rising to their feet, the quartet swelling into the opening bars of the processional. She should not have checked her phone, not now, not at the threshold, but Fode had promised. One text. They locked her out. She's on the steps. Alone, come now. Isatu read it twice. Her hands, steady enough to suture a wound an hour earlier, began to shake. Not from nerves, from something that started in her sternum and moved outward like heat through a wire. She looked down the length of the aisle. 400 guests in their finest, half of them people she barely knew. The Ashfords' entire social circle gathered to witness a ceremony her own mother had just been physically barred from entering. She looked at row 4, empty. She did not walk down the aisle. She turned, lifted the front of her gown, and walked back the way she'd come. Past her bridesmaids' startled faces, past the wedding coordinator, past the string quartet, whose bows faltered mid-phrase, straight for the heavy oak doors at the rear of the church. She pushed them open with both hands. There her mother was, sitting on the cold stone step in the January air, Jill still perfectly tied, pot in her lap, hands folded over the cloth, waiting. She looked up. She saw her daughter in a wedding gown, standing in the open doorway, Toronto's gray winter sky behind her. Isatu, Mama, I know. I'm so sorry. I know. Isatu walked down the steps and sat beside her mother on the freezing stone, in a gown that cost more than her mother had earned in an entire year of frying akara. Is that akara? I made it at 4 this morning. For your wedding. Isatu looked at the pot, at her mother's hands wrapped around it. Those hands that had paid for medical school, that had built her entire life one bean cake at a time. Can I have a piece? Mabinti's chin trembled. She unwrapped the cloth. The akara was still faintly warm. She broke off a piece and pressed it into her daughter's palm the way she had done, since Isatu was small enough to sit on the counter watching her cook. It's perfect, Mama. Of course it is. I've been frying akara for 36 years. Oh, I know. That's exactly what I'm about to tell them. Tell who? Everyone. Isatu stood. She took the pot from her mother's lap and tucked it under one arm. She held out her other hand. Come with me, Mama. Isatu, they said I couldn't. They were wrong. Come with me. She took her mother's hand, amber-stained, calloused, permanently marked by 3 decades of hot oil, in her own gloved one, and walked her up the steps, through the heavy oak doors, and into the church. 400 heads turned, 400 mouths opened. Trent, standing frozen at the altar, went pale. Vivienne, in the front pew, went white. Isatu walked her mother down the center aisle, slow and deliberate, past row 19 where they'd first placed her, past row 4 where they'd compromised, all the way to the altar. She set the pot down on the small table, meant for the unity candle. Then she turned to face 400 people. My name is Isatu Kamara, and before anyone says another word, I have something to say. Nobody moved. The quartet had gone silent. The officiant lowered his hands. When I was 6 years old, my mother packed a cast-iron skillet in a suitcase to bring to Canada. My father asked her why she'd bring a cooking pot to a country with everything. She told him Canada had a lot of things, but it didn't have her akara, and her daughter would need to eat something that tasted like home. She let that settle. She was right. So for 36 years, she made it herself. 3 in the morning, in a parking lot in Scarborough, in July heat and February cold, until her hands looked like this. She held her mother's hand up gently for everyone to see. These hands are stained from 3 decades of palm oil. These knuckles are swollen from grinding beans by hand because she said a machine made the batter lazy. Every dollar she made from a $2 bag of akara went into an envelope labeled with my name. She walked to the bus stop in the snow because she gave the fare money to my tuition. She wore the same 3 dresses for a decade so I could have textbooks. Everything I am, my clinic, my degree, my life, started with a cast iron pan and a woman who refused to stop cooking. She looked directly at Vivienne, then at Trent. This morning, my mother woke up at 4 a.m. and fried akara for 400 guests she was told she couldn't feed. She put on the dress she wore at her own wedding 36 years ago. She carried that food up these steps, and she was told she wasn't welcome at her own daughter's wedding. Because her food wasn't cohesive with the menu. Because her hands weren't the right kind of hands. Gasps rippled through the pews. 2 security guards closed those doors on her, and she sat on a stone step in January and waited, alone, while 400 people sat inside eating hors d'oeuvre, and not one person, not one, asked where the bride's mother had gone. Except my best friend, who sent me 4 words. They locked her out. Fode, near the back, pressed his lips together and nodded once. I want to ask this room a question. What kind of family locks a mother out of her own daughter's wedding because her food isn't French enough? Because her hands aren't soft enough? I'll tell you what kind. The kind that mistakes presentation for love and status for sacrifice. A $175 tasting menu over a $2 bag of akara that a woman made at 4 in the morning because she wanted her daughter's wedding to taste like where they came from. She looked at Trent. His face had gone the color of the tablecloths. Trent, I loved you. But I watched you flinch the first time my mother took your hands. I watched you throw her food in the garbage. I watched you spend 22 minutes in her hospital room and leave because it made you uncomfortable. I watched your mother move her from row 19 to row 4, like she was cargo being repositioned. And today I watched your family lock her outside a church in the cold. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. My father used to tell me, the hand that fries your akara at dawn is holier than any hand raised in prayer on Sunday. You locked that hand outside. She reached into her clutch and drew out the worn yellow measuring tape. This belonged to my father. He was a shoemaker. He died with this in his hand, at a workbench, fixing someone's boots so we could pay rent. The last thing he ever taught me wasn't about shoes. It was this. Love is proven with the hands, not the mouth. My mother's hands built everything I have, and today, this family decided those hands weren't welcome in a building. She looked at her mother, tears finally slipping loose. Mama, I'm sorry it took me this long to see it clearly. You should never have been in row 19, or row 4, or on those steps. You should have been standing right here beside me, the entire time. She turned back to the room one final time. This wedding is over. Not postponed. Over. I won't marry into a family that locks my mother in the cold. I won't build a life with someone who's ashamed of the hands that built mine. She picked up the pot. Mama, let's go home. I'm starving. Fode stood in the back pew and started clapping. Then a woman in row 9 rose. Then a man in row 14. Then the whole chapel, 400 people on their feet, some crying, some reaching out to touch Mabinti's shoulder as she passed. Someone whispering, God bless you, Auntie. Issa too walked her mother back down the aisle, past the abandoned bouquet, past the $300,000 wedding that would never happen, through the oak doors, and out into the gray Toronto light. stood alone at the altar. Vivienne sat frozen in the front pew, her pearls suddenly looking like something ordered off a catalog, and the doors stayed open this time, because there was nobody left worth locking out. The video, someone in row 11 had filmed the whole speech on their phone, hit 12 million views in 4 days across the country and beyond. Bride stops her own wedding for her mother. The comments broke wide open. People calling their mothers from the parking lot. People booking flights home they'd been putting off for years. Someone wrote, "The Akara on the altar, I will never get over that image." And it became, for a while, a kind of national shorthand. Isatu turned down every interview request. "This isn't about me," she said once, briefly, to a reporter who cornered her outside the clinic. "It's about a woman who fried akara at 4 in the morning for a wedding she wasn't allowed to attend." Mabinti was offered her own cooking segment on a local morning show. She declined. "I already have a show," she said. "It starts at 4 a.m. in a parking lot in Scarborough. Everyone's invited. Bring your own plate." Vivienne's museum committee quietly asked her to step down within the month. The Ashford family's real estate firm lost 2 commercial contracts they'd been counting on. Trent never reached out. Some silences say everything they need to. But this story doesn't end on a church step, because Mabinti had told her daughter once, years earlier, over a pot of pepper soup, "My girl, God doesn't close one door without already frying something for what comes next." What came next was Ibrahim. 2 weeks after the canceled wedding, Ibrahim showed up for his usual Thursday visit and found Mabinti humming in her kitchen. "Auntie, you should be resting." Resting is for people who are finished living. I am not finished. He sat on the floor, as he always did, and peeled onions while she cooked. And Isatu, who had started coming by more often since the wedding, joined them that particular Thursday, exhausted from a full clinic day, and found the two of them laughing about something in the kitchen. "Who is this?" she asked her mother, only half joking. "Sitting on my mother's floor peeling onions like he owns the place." "This is Ibrahim. He held my hand in the hospital when your fiancé's family couldn't be bothered. He's been coming every Thursday since." Ibrahim looked up, onion in one hand. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said back. "Your mother talks about you constantly. She talks about you too. Says you still can't fry akara properly. That's slander. I've made 3 batches. And thrown away 2, Mabinti called from the stove. Almost isn't ready. But you'll get there." They laughed, and in a small kitchen that smelled of hot oil and onions and 36 years of sacrifice, something began the way dough begins to rise. Invisible at first, and then, quite suddenly, everywhere. Ibrahim started coming on Thursdays for a reason that had less and less to do with Mabinti and more to do with the woman who now regularly sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor across from him, sleeves rolled up, pretending she still needed lessons in a recipe she could probably recite in her sleep. "You're a doctor," he told her once, "and you still can't dice an onion evenly. Different skill set entirely. It's the same motion as suturing. I don't suture onions. You're useless in this kitchen. Then we have something in common." One evening the power went out across their block during a January storm. Mabinti lit candles, and the 3 of them sat on the kitchen floor, eating by candlelight, telling stories about Freetown, about the ocean, about a grandmother who used to say food cooked in the dark tastes better because it forces you to eat with your heart instead of your eyes. Isatu watched Ibrahim in that candlelight, flour on his fingers, laughing with a woman he'd chosen to keep showing up for long after his job required nothing more of him, and she felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she wanted to admit. Something simple and quiet and entirely real. 8 months after the canceled wedding, Trent came, unannounced, to Mabinti's Saturday stand at the market. No expensive coat this time. No driver waiting at the curb. He stood at the back of the line like anyone else. When he reached the front, Mabinti studied him for a long moment. "You want a kara, please?" And I wanted to say, "I didn't ask what you wanted to say. I asked if you want a kara." "Yes, please." She wrapped a bag, set it on the counter. $2. He handed her a 20. "I don't want change," he said. She looked at the bill, looked at him, and reached under the table for 2 more bags, stacking them beside the first. "Take these home. Tell your mother the stand is open to everyone, even people who lock old women out in the cold." Trent stood there in the market and, by the accounts of the people in line behind him, cried like someone finally being forgiven for something they hadn't earned. Ibrahim proposed to Isatu on a Thursday evening on Mabinti's kitchen floor, where they'd first really talked over a pile of onion skins. No ring box, he'd wrapped it in a small square of the same checkered cloth Mabinti used for her akara. "You held my mother's hands when the world decided they weren't worth holding," he said. "You sat on this floor and learned her recipes, and never once burned a single batch on purpose, just to make her laugh. You loved her before you ever really let yourself love me." He opened the cloth, a simple gold band engraved inside with a single word in Creole. "Titi, daughter, beloved. Will you marry me?" Not the doctor. Me, the boy who grew up eating his mother's cooking behind a grocery store on the Golden Mile. Mabinti, at the stove, pretended very hard to be occupied with a pot of jollof. "Yes," Isatu said. "You impossible, onion peeling, akara ruining man." Yes, they married 5 months later, not at a stone chapel in Rosedale, but at Mabinti's stand in the Scarborough Town Center parking lot, on a Sunday morning folding tables set between the fruit vendor and the coffee cart. Mabinti closed her stand for the first time in over 30 years, hung string lights and cloth banners from the awning, and set the old cast-iron skillet in the center like something sacred. 60 guests. Ibrahim's parents from the grocery store. Fodea's best man, who stood up and said, "I've known Isatu for 15 years. I watched her build a clinic that keeps half of Scarborough healthy." But the most important thing she ever built was the bridge back to her mother's kitchen, and the man beside her showed her the way home. Mabinti fried akara for every single guest, up since 3 that morning, 60 bundles wrapped and stacked like a small golden tower. Isatu said her vows standing on the pavement between a fruit stand and a coffee cart. "Ibrahim, you loved my mother before you loved me. You held her hands when they were scarred and stained, and the world called them lesser. You sat on her floor and stayed. That's what love actually is, staying, even when the akara isn't perfect yet." Mabinti stood up at the end, uninvited because nobody stops a 59-year-old Sierra Leonean woman once she has something to say. "My husband used to tell me the hand that fries your akara at dawn is holier than any hand raised in prayer. I want to add one thing to that. The hand that holds those tired, scarred, stained hands when the world walks past them. That hand is family too. That hand is home." And so wherever you're watching this from tonight, Scarborough, Halifax, Winnipeg, or somewhere much colder still, tell us, if they locked your mother out in the cold on your wedding day, what would you have done? Drop your answer below. And if this story moved something in you, the way it moved us, hit subscribe, because Ancient African Folktales has more stories like this one waiting, and we'll see you and Sue in the next.